Welcome to the Tree of Life podcast. My name is Joel Ledford, and I have the privilege of being here today with Vicki Morgan. Vicki, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So, Vicki, one of the things that we do in the show is we usually start by asking people about their backgrounds. And so I'm interested to know, how did you end up at UC Davis? How did you get interested in science? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I grew up in Miami, Florida. I was raised by a single mother, and then it was really important for her to take us out to the beaches and to parks, and so we spent a lot of time outside exploring the world. And I feel like a lot of my interest came from those excursions I used to take with her growing up. After I graduated high school, I did my undergrad at Cornell University, and then I took 2 gap years to work at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography down in San Diego. And then after that, I was feeling the urge to go back into science, and so I applied to grad school here at UC Davis, and I'm currently a 5th year in population biology.
Wow, that's amazing. So what was it like to be little Vicki? Like, were you on the beach and then you looked out and you were mesmerized? What triggered your interest in science?
I think I used to just watch a lot of Animal Planet, and so originally I wanted to be a veterinarian, but then the thought of cutting into animals just sort of freaked me out. But then I wanted to be some sort of wildlife biologist, and so I remember one of my essays for applying to Cornell was about me exploring some jungle in the forest, looking for some animals, and that was always just something that was really important to me, is just learning about animals.
So you grew up in Florida, and then you moved to upstate New York.
Yes.
How was winter?
Hard. So I had my first winter there, and it was amazing to see the snowfall, but then it just didn't stop. And so I remember my last year was snowing in May or something like that. So it was very intense winters, but they were also really beautiful and different from where I grew up.
Nice.
So it was really nice to get that change of scenery and experience seasons. I saw my first fall, so it's
that's
pretty
great.
exciting.
That's great. So today we want to talk about a few things, but one of the themes that I would at least start the conversation with is just the transition to life on land. And so given that this transition has happened in animals multiple times independently, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about, what do you think the advantages are to living life on land? What are the challenges that animals have to overcome when they transition to life on land? And what you think.
Yeah, so I think it's a very difficult transition to make, just because there are a lot of physiological and biological systems that have to change to actually make the animal able to survive on terrestrial habitats. And it makes it so that's a really difficult transition to make. So all of the terrestrial life that we see on Earth currently, apart from the crabs, is arisen from about 6 to 7 ancestors that came up onto land and were just really successful, and they diversified there. And what's interesting about my research is that in the crabs alone, that transition has happened independently up to 11 times.
Wow.
So the crabs seem really good at doing it. Everything else seems really bad at doing it. And so my research is trying to understand why that's so. But some of the challenges is, how do you breathe air on air? So if you're normally used to breathing air in the water, getting oxygen from the water, how do you do that on land? A lot of reproductive systems have to change, osmoregulation, nitrogenous waste excretion, visual and olfactory systems. So there's a long list of challenges they have to adapt to.
What about reproduction? I mean, so whenever I think of the transition to life on land, I think, if you're ancestrally marine or in the water, probably you're doing some kind of external fertilization, you're, broadcasting gametes, and then when you get on water, you have kind of a new set of challenges. How do crabs solve this problem?
So there are 2 main ways that they solve it. So the crabs that have come up through fresh water have adapted to have more direct development. So instead of doing the broadcast spawning, they lay eggs, and then the juveniles hatch as baby crabs after they develop inside of the egg. And so that seems to be unique for the freshwater crabs. But then the marine crabs actually have these really amazing migrations where they go back to the ocean and they drop their eggs in the water to develop more fully. And so in a way, the ones that have come up through the intertidal zone are still very connected to the ocean, because every year they have to migrate back. And it's led to these really incredible migrations on Christmas Island, where you just have hundreds of thousands of crabs that leave the forest to go to the ocean and mate and then just come back. And so.
Wow, that's amazing. So is there some kind of cue that they're using to all sort of push out at once?
It's kind of amazing. So it's tied to the rainy season. So whenever it starts to rain a lot, the crabs sort of notice, oh, it's time to go. And so they all just leave their burrows and they start making their migration. And it also seems to happen around December or January every year. So it's probably like the cue of the wet season in Australia, which is where it is.
Right.
And, yeah.
Wow. And so you go on the beach and you just see thousands and thousands of crabs.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And then a month later, you come out and all the baby crabs are coming back from the ocean. And then they're just like these itty bitty little things. There are lots of like really amazing videos on YouTube of that, I guess, reverse migration of the baby crabs coming back on the land.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, one of the crabs that I think about when I think about your research that you've been doing are coconut crabs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're definitely standouts
Yeah.
among crabs. So I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about coconut crabs, what they are, who they're related to, and what their general biology is like.
Sure. So I think the coconut crab is the most conspicuous land crab just because it gets to be like a meter in length and 4 kilograms. So they get to be really big and massive. And just if you ever are in a place that has a coconut crab, they're just really hard to miss because they're big and they sort of walk really slowly. They're closely related to hermit crabs, so they're actually hermit crabs. And so when they're young, they actually grow inside of the shell. But then they get to a size where they can't find any snail shells that are big enough, and they just abandon the shell and they just keep getting bigger. So they're hermit crabs. Yeah.
They're hermit crabs. So I go and we in Biz2C labs, for example, we definitely use hermit crabs as examples. Thanks for watching our video. If you enjoyed the content but would like an audio-only version, please go to iTunes and look up Tree of Life UC Davis. If you want to see more videos on YouTube, please click the subscribe button and don't forget to hit the little bell icon if you want to receive notifications of new content.